comparing ourselves to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 9 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. Following a terrifying exodus of the wealthy since 2017, why the departure of millionaires from this country is a hollow victory, which will make all of us poorer.
Point longer term, then obviously we'd want to see the UK return to the heart of Europe.
Doesn't time fly? On the 8-year anniversary of the referendum, will Brexit survive the next government? Also tonight, with Wimbledon around the corner, there's one noticeable absentee. The treatment of Sue Barker, unceremoniously dumped by the BBC, is a national disgrace. Now, I wouldn't normally do two BBC topics 2 days in a row, but I don't make the news agenda, and I'll be tackling the BBC and dealing with their treatment of Sue Barker in a special Take at 10 in an hour's time. You won't want to miss it. So 2 hours of big opinion, big debate and big entertainment. Lots to get through. Why we need millionaires after the news headlines and the independently wealthy Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. And good evening to you. Our top stories tonight. Labour is calling on the Gambling Commission to name candidates being investigated over the election date betting scandal. Pat McFadden, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has written to the Commission's CEO, urging for the details to be released before polling day. It comes amid reports that the Tory party's Chief Data Officer, Nick Mason, has taken a leave of absence. The Tories' Director of Campaigns, Tony Lee, and his wife, Laura Saunders, are also being probed, as is the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Private Secretary, Craig Williams, who's admitted to an error of judgment. The Labour leader has suggested that benefits offer less dignity to people than earning a living through work. Sir Keir Starmer took aim at handouts from the state in a piece for the Sunday Telegraph. He said serving the interests of working people means understanding that they want success more than state support. Of course, his comments come as the latest Savanta poll shows Labour on 42% of the vote and the Conservatives on 19%. Flights have restarted at Manchester Airport after a quarter were cancelled due to a power outage. Earlier, all flights from Terminals 1 and 2 were cancelled, passengers being advised not to come to the airport after a major power cut caused huge queues and disruption to baggage processing. Work is now underway to reschedule them in the coming days, and tomorrow's flights are not thought to be affected. Search teams attempting to locate British teenager Jay Slater have been narrowing their efforts down to small buildings close to where his phone last pinged in Tenerife today. Jay Slater went missing on Monday after attending a music festival on the Spanish island. Those conducting the searches could be seen looking into blue barrels outside one of the small buildings. Just before he went missing, the 19-year-old had called a friend and said he was lost and needed water. Well, a rapidly developing story. More than 6 police officers, an Orthodox priest and 4 gunmen have been killed in a series of shootings in Dagestan, Russian media is reporting. The region's interior ministry says 12 other police officers have also been injured after the gunmen opened fire at a synagogue, an Orthodox church and a police post in the North Caucasus region. Both the synagogue and church were ablaze. There have also been reports and eyewitness videos showing people wearing dark clothing and shooting at emergency service vehicles responding in Makhakkala in southern Russia. Scotland are playing Hungary this evening in their final Group A game of the Euros football tournament. Fans arrived in jubilant mood at the MHP Arena in Stuttgart. The clash could see Scotland reach the knockout stage of a major tournament for the first time. Critics didn't give the injury-hit Scots much of a hope after their 5-1 opening loss to hosts Germany in Munich, but a 1-1 draw with the Swiss has placed them within reach of qualification. It's currently 0-0. Well, for the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Mark.
Thank you, Ray. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight. In the big story, on the 8-year anniversary of the referendum, should Brexit be reversed to boost the economy? Plus, will it survive? The next government I'll do battle with a leading Lib Dem advisor who wants us back in. In a Take at 10 special with Wimbledon around the corner, there's one noticeable absentee. The treatment of Sue Barker, unceremoniously dumped by the BBC, is a national disgrace. Also tonight, is university a waste of time and money for millions of young Brits when they could do practical training instead? I'll be asking my Mark Meets guest, former Minister for Skills and Apprenticeships, Robert Halfon. And reacting to all of the big stories tonight, Claire Pearsall, Nigel Nelson and Yosef David. Plus, the most important part of the show, your messages, they come straight to my laptop, gbnews.com/your say. And this show has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. A big 2 hours to come. The BBC's treatment of Sue Barker at 10. You won't want to miss it. But first, my big opinion. Writing in The Guardian, broadcaster and former banker Nels Abbey has celebrated the departure of Britain's super-rich with the following headline. It reads as follows: Britain's millionaires are fleeing. Good night and good luck, I say. Wow. Well, 16,500 millionaires, that's right, 16,500 millionaires have left the UK since 2017, with almost 10,000 projected to leave this year alone. Is this a cause for celebration? Are millionaires bad for Britain? Well, of course, it's very sad that we live in a world where someone can drive around in a gold-plated Rolls-Royce whilst others don't have a roof over their head. That is a tragedy. But you don't help those at the bottom end of the economic ladder by attacking the rich. It's my view that creating an environment unwelcoming to those people who make something of their lives, take risks and work hard, well, I think all it achieves is that we shoot ourselves in the foot, making ourselves poorer and killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. History is a great teacher, and it's clear that adopting a market economy based on free trade and wealth creation has seen billions of people lifted out of poverty. Capitalism is not perfect, it's unequal. It needs to be controlled and kept in check. But it works, and it delivers for all. Now, before you think that I want a society of haves and have-nots, far from it, I believe in taxation. It's there to deliver great public services and offer support to those less fortunate. But an assault on the top end sees high achievers take flight, which impacts national income and harms everyone. Bashing the rich, encouraging them to live in other places might make a good headline. It might feel like just revenge on people with swimming pools and helicopter pads. But the painful truth is that we need these rich people. We need their tax income. We need their investment. We need the businesses they create. We need the jobs and the employment that they generate. We need the innovation that they're behind. And we need them to go shopping in this country. The VAT alone on a Rolls-Royce Spectre, other car brands are available, but this is the one I fancy. Well, that's a car that's designed and built by British workers in the UK. The VAT on one of those is £60,000. So a rich person buys one posh car and we get 60 grand straight into the nation's coffers. And this journalist with a background in finance is happy to see these people go, make it make sense. Yes, the rich have got to pay their share, absolutely, but it's a great myth that they don't. In figures relating to 2019, the wealthiest 1% of the country paid 30% of all income tax, and the wealthiest 10% paid 60%. So 10% pay more than half. A brave Chancellor of the Exchequer would give up any of that. But the millionaires that we've already lost have taken their money with them. I don't see that as social justice. I see it as a race to the bottom. Losing thousands of millionaires in a year is a hollow victory, particularly when they go to our rivals. They go to Paris, New York, Singapore and Dubai. Some activists go around wearing T-shirts that say, "Eat the rich." Well, they'll be eating their words when they see the consequences. I'm sorry, folks, it's sad that we live in an unequal world. You've got people in Ferraris and Bentleys and Jaguars, and you've got other people, they don't have a home. But that is our system, and frankly, if you make the rich go away, we get poorer. But your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your messages shortly, but first, tonight's top pundits. We have political commentator Yosef David, former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall, and GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. Claire, let me start with you. We need rich people. That is the reality.
Yes, we do. And it's always, I find, the politics of envy and just general concern that others have something that they don't. And yes, we would all like to have that car that you put up there, that Rolls-Royce or an Aston Martin. In my case,
is that what you've pencilled in an Aston Martin for the next car?
I've pencilled that in throughout my years, but
I've heard that Nigel's saving up for one for your 60th.
A lottery win for that one.
We would. But when you look at cars alone, not only is there the VAT on the car purchase, there is also the road fund licence that you have to pay, all of the rest, the fuel that you have to put in, all of that has VAT on it, the taxes go into the Treasury. So just on cars alone, that money we would lose if people disappeared off, took their cars over to Dubai or Singapore or wherever, or just didn't buy them, then any manufacturing that we have in this country would disappear. I don't like the fact that we see these people as a problem when all we need to do is actually just aspire to work a little bit harder. Now, I know that that'll probably get me an awful lot of abuse, and I do appreciate that there are people scraping by that don't have anything, but just by getting rid of the rich and celebrating them jetting out of here isn't going to make that person's life any better.
Indeed, Nigel, this shouldn't be party political, should it? I think that Ed Davey, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer should be watching this and nodding their heads, because the bottom line is that rich people are the goose that lay the golden eggs.
Well, I mean, in a sense, that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are on the same side when it comes down to rich non-doms. They both want to tax them.
Which is, by the way, a diabolical mistake.
Well, I think not. But then I don't want the millionaires to leave. I think they should be in the country for all the reasons that Claire says, but let's tax them properly. If you tax the top 350 richest families, a wealth tax of just 2%, this is not my idea, this is the millionaires themselves, an organisation called Patriotic Millionaires.
Let them pay it.
And they're saying
they can do that voluntarily.
They're saying
they can set up a direct debit right now.
No, we have to actually. It has to be part of the tax system. But that 2% would raise £16 billion and pay for all of Labour's spending plans without having to dip into their other tax bills.
Except it just takes one of those families to leave the UK, and we're already minus.
Yeah, but they're leaving the UK because they don't pay any tax. They go to places like Monaco. There's no inheritance tax. They don't pay.
Okay, Yosef David. I mean, you're not a particularly super rich man yourself, right? You work hard in social work, right? So what is your view of the super rich?
Well, It is simply a fact that if we lose millionaires from this country, the tax yield will be lower. There's no question about that. These are the people whose big spending helps to fuel the economy. They're hiring, employing thousands of people. They're paying more tax than the vast majority of the people who live in the country. And what I can say is we're seeing the cumulative effect of basically turning this country into a hostile place for people who are wealthy. And I think that feeds into a culture of jealousy. It's a culture where if you are successful, if you've worked hard, then people are going to deride you. And I think when we look at public life, there are people who are wealthy, and there's judgments put on their actions, not based on their abilities, but because they're rich.
Nigel, I've got an idea, because like you, and like Claire, and like Yosef, I really care about the NHS, schools, crime, public services. So what I would do is I would slash taxes on the super rich to make Britain a haven. When they talked about Brexit back in the day, Britain was going to become Singapore on Thames, right? I can really get behind that. I think that Britain should be a low-tax haven.
What happened to that, by the way?
Well, I know, I'm still waiting. But I think what we should do is we should make Britain the most attractive place in the world for rich people so that we can have that investment, because rich people tend to invest. They don't just go shopping. They start businesses. Like Yosef said, they employ people. What's the argument there against reducing taxes on the rich?
The whole point about rich people is they want to get richer. What they're concerned about is their own personal wealth. So if they want to live here, whether you're a foreigner, a non-dom, or whether you're a Brit who's made a lot of money, you pay the correct amount of taxes. The whole point of the situation of wealth in this country has gone topsy-turvy. It was £40 billion the top 200 families had back in '89 when the rich list started. It's now got over £700 billion. The Queen was the richest person back then. The King now is 285th.
James Dyson, right, the creator of the Dyson vacuum cleaner, paid over £100 million in personal taxation last year.
Excellent.
Do you really want to make life uncomfortable for him that he goes somewhere else?
Well, obviously...
I would love bomb the guy. I would actually send him flowers every day and thank him. I might even send a lady around.
But clearly he's not going somewhere else. Quite rightly, he's paying his fair share of tax. It's an awful lot of money, but great. That's the kind of person we need, and we want to keep him paying his taxes into the British economy.
OK, Claire, last word.
I was to say, if you reduce the taxes, wouldn't you then stop those people shoving things into offshore bank accounts? And you
They do it anyway.
You would discourage people from being a non-dom at that point.
They're greedy.
They
just want to keep as much money as they can.
There you go. Well, listen, it's all kicked off in the studio. Mark Dolan tonight, the home of diverse opinion. What is yours? gbnews.com/your say. We've lost 16,500 millionaires since 2017. I think that is a national crisis, and our next Prime Minister must deal with it. But next up in the big story, on the 8-year anniversary of the referendum, will Brexit survive the next government? We'll be debating that next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
The Princess of Wales has said she's excited by a new report on prioritising early childhood, a cause, as we know, that she's closely associated with.
Yes, the task force findings claim that the UK could reap £45.5 billion in economic benefits if firms prioritise early childhood.
Well, let's talk about this now with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning.
I suppose it's characteristically Catherine, isn't it, to say she doesn't want to distract from this report by sort of people talking about her health. But we should start probably by saying she said she's not feeling well enough to come and talk about this in public, but sort of saying she's watching it, keeping a close eye from behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely. This should not be seen as a return to work by the Princess of Wales, but I have been told she's A, read the report and B, been briefed on it. But this all stems really from her work when she started being a working member of the royal family, where she was working closely with people suffering from addiction, mental health problems. And what she found is all of these issues tend to stem from a poor start in life, so the first 5 years of a child's life. So in January 2023, she set up Shaping Us, this awareness campaign for the early years. 2 months later, she convened the business task force, so 8 members of big businesses across the UK, and over a generation, that could add, as they claim, more than £40 billion to the UK economy each year. We spoke to Peter Grigg yesterday. He's the chair of Home Starts UK, a charity which supports young families. Let's hear what he said about the Princess's role in this.
She's been a real driving force behind the report and everything it's done. And when we've spent time with the Royal Foundation, what it does, it reminds everyone that this is really important work and early childhood matters, that more businesses should get involved, that more charities are out there for people who want to do more to support families and children. So it's been a wonderful experience.
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said stump. You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere. Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
Welcome back. Lots to get through, but here is a simple question for you. Is Brexit going to survive the next government? Let's talk about that in the big story, because today marks the 8-year anniversary of the Brexit referendum. This weekend, Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch, tipped by many to be a future leader of the Conservative Party, says that Labour will reverse Brexit if it wins the general election. Meanwhile, Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper said this today.
At some point, longer term, then obviously we'd want to see the UK return to the heart of Europe. But we're very clear that in this election, we can see that families are really, really struggling. Many families really on the brink. That's why we're campaigning so hard to save our NHS and social care and tackle the cost of living crisis.
There you go. Well, will we still have Brexit in 5 years' time? Let's get the views of former Lib Dem advisor Pablo Ohana. Pablo, lovely to have you on the show. How do you think Labour are going to handle Brexit if they win the election as is predicted?
Well, I was slightly confused about Kemi's comments because Labour has ruled out any form of meaningful relationship with the EU in their manifesto, so I'm not actually sure what she's referring to. They might not want to sort of destroy our standing on the global stage any further, but they've ruled out things like single market, custom union, rejoining. I think her attacks on the Lib Dems would be totally fair, but the Labour Party, I'm not so sure.
The Lib Dems want us back in, but that's not going to happen under a Labour government, is it? Particularly if Labour win a big majority, the Lib Dems will have no leverage whatsoever.
I can't see the Labour Party taking us back into any serious relationship with Europe. I think without a really, really strong Liberal Democrat presence in Parliament, I don't see how that happens. The Liberal Democrats have always been pro-European. To be fair to them, they have never made any bones about that. They are very clear. They wanted a second referendum. They wanted to stop Brexit. They are very, very honest and open about that. I think if there is a strong Liberal Democrat vote and a very strong Liberal Democrat presence in Parliament, you will start to see that sort of nudging. And I know, obviously, the Liberal Democrats want to return to the single market. I think there is a fair case for that. And I'm sure they will make that case to the Labour Party if they win the next election. But I think if Labour gets this kind of super majority that everyone is now, talking about, I don't think that will happen. I think Labour needs... I think it needs a strong Liberal Democrat presence to kind of push them forward on that agenda.
Well, Pablo, I think that the Lib Dems have got plenty to say for themselves in policy. A lot of it's quite compelling, but we don't want to go back into the EU, do we, given the fact that Brexit has been a triumph?
I mean, a triumph is certainly not the word I would use. It was interesting that there was a poll recently that showed that 63% of Britons wanted to return to the single market, including Conservative voters, actually, and obviously Labour and Lib Dem voters. I really don't think that there is any measure in which Brexit can be seen as a success. I mean, the fundamental the central part of the campaign to leave was sort of controlling our borders and taking back control of our laws. Immigration has more than doubled since we left the EU. So I'm not sure.
Indeed, but whoever becomes prime minister, absolutely, you're right, but that's a policy choice by the current government. But whoever becomes prime minister will have control over our borders, which wouldn't have happened under the previous, membership of the EU. Let's have a look at whether it's been a triumph. I mean, the UK at the moment, Pablo, is #1 in the G7 for economic growth. And I think, Harry, if you could grab that graph of growth since 2010, I think it's quite compelling. So let's have a look at this. This is official ONS statistics. The UK has grown faster than any other major European economy since 2010. You've got Germany and France, Spain and Italy in blue. And look, there's the UK in red. That looks pretty successful to me. What happened to that Brexit disaster?
I mean, there are lots of measures in which you can look at how Brexit has performed. I think if you were to compare how the UK economy is performing since leaving the EU, overall we are doing worse. We are, in fact, the ONS, as in the same place that you've got those figures from, the government's own statistics are showing that Brexit is costing us £1 million every single hour. And I find it really funny that right now, as you say, here we are, 8th anniversary of the referendum. The Labour Party and Tory parties are claiming, oh, policies are going to cost this much if Labour get in, it's going to cost 38 billion if the Tories get in, it's going to cost 46 billion, all these kind of figures, everyone's throwing them around. The government has said that Brexit is costing us 100 billion every single year. So all these figures around how much Labour and Tory policies are going to cost mean nothing if we're still
Pablo,
at
listen,
the EU.
I'm delighted to have you on the show, and we'll have this conversation essentially trusting the figures that we're both sharing. I don't know where £1 million a day comes from, but this is a good faith interview, so I'll take your word for it. But I'm afraid the good news keeps rolling on, because since Brexit, the UK actually leapfrogged France to become #8 in the world for manufacturing, and the UK has gone from #7 to #4 in the world for exports, again, since Brexit. I don't want to be a stuck record, but let's have a look at the International Monetary Fund, who have made their per capita predictions for economic growth over the next 5 years. Harry, do you have the slide? I've got more slides than Robert Peston, let me tell you. Where is it? We're firing it up. But the bottom line is I just don't think it stands up to scrutiny that Brexit's been a disaster. There you go, Pablo. IMF GDP per capita growth projections, UK #2, just behind America, ahead of Japan, France, Germany, Italy and Canada.
But again, this is one figure that you're pulling out. If you were to look...
Well, it's economic growth. It's the main figure, isn't it? Wasn't the main argument against Brexit the economy?
It was one of them. I think there are multiple reasons why leaving the EU was a bad idea. I think the economy is one of them. That 100 billion figure, that £1 million every hour, is mostly in lost trade. But I think that there are wider and broader issues around Brexit that are still affecting us. And I think there is also like a fundamental question that referendum plunged our country into a sort of a confusion about who we are as a country and our characters. And I'm a patriot. I love our country, really. But I do think that we have lost a sense of who we are, and that our historic principles that have guided this country about being welcoming and tolerant have been lost. And there's a deep division in our country that started with that referendum and hasn't been resolved. And I think that there are lots of questions around lost trade and economy this and economy that, but there is also a really fundamental question about who we are as a country. And it worries me because I love this country, and yet it just doesn't feel like who we were historically, the kind of country that was, there for everyone's hour of need. We've lost that, and people feel unwelcome, and there is a division and a divide that I think is really worrying, and it feels right now irreparable, and that worries me.
OK, well, look, Pablo, we can end on a very positive note, which is that we have something really significant in common, which is that we both voted for Remain. And I understand the points you're making about the cultural impacts on the country. I think it's very sad that British youngsters can't go off and get a job in Italy or France or Spain. I totally agree. I think a price has been paid. I just don't see the Brexit disaster. But it's been brilliant to have you on the show. A really quick one before you go. I've only got a couple of seconds. But do you think that eventually Brexit will be reversed? Do you anticipate the UK re-entering the European Union in, let's say, the next 2 decades?
2 decades, yes. I think this is a real long-term project. It is not going to happen in the next parliament, maybe even not in the next 10 years, but certainly in my lifetime. I think it's inevitable because I think we're only a small country and we work better when we're together, whether that's, you know, as you say, things like being able to travel and work freely across Europe is a huge benefit that we've lost. And I think things like the Lib Dem policy to take us back into the single market is a logical step to be like, okay, we're not going to rejoin tomorrow. We all know that. No one is arguing, or no one sensible is arguing for that. But something like the single market where we can start to get those benefits back, I think is a logical next step.
Pablo Ohana, do join us again in the near future. It's been a fascinating conversation. My thanks to former Lib Dem advisor Pablo Ohana. Let's get reaction now from Yosef David, Claire Pearsall and Nigel Nelson. Yosef, what Brexit disaster?
I have to say, watching that interview, that was incredible. It's been 8 years and they still don't get it. What we're all doing is making the problem, the mistake of David Cameron, which is to frame this in terms of the economy. It's not about the economy. It's about our society. It's about our sovereignty. It's about identity. These are the things that people voted for. And so Brexit has been an outstanding success because we've managed to leave the European Union. We've left...
Without any noticeable damage?
Yes, indeed. I mean, there's always going to be turbulence.
Correct. And I've got viewers and listeners who are struggling to export goods. Small and medium-sized businesses have been through hell. There is more red tape.
At what cost? Freedom, though. We are a nation in our own respect. We can leave, forge our relationships with the rest of the world. It's a fantastic opportunity. There's not been a disaster.
Nigel, I voted Remain in 2016. I've spent the rest of the time, spent the rest of the time being a cheerleader for the project because actually we're out and I don't see a catastrophic consequence. I mean, you could argue that we've not had the Brexit benefits, but economic growth is solid. You know, we're safe. We're never going to have the euro, single European army. We're not paying £20 billion a month for membership. Sounds like a win to me.
Well, Brexit hasn't been a disaster. I would agree with you. No, it's not been a success. I mean, Claire and Yosef, they voted for Brexit because they wanted sovereignty. They wanted to take back control. In which case, you got what you wanted. If you're happy with the price that had to be paid, so increased food bills. So, an example, food has gone up 25% since 2019. 8% of that is to do with Brexit.
All right, here we go. Let's get the graph. Harry, now listen, I have got official statistics here on the cost of food, food inflation. And here it comes. And this is, if you lose the strap, there you go. Thank you so much. This is from 2016 right through until 2023. And you'll see this is CPI, food and non-alcoholic beverage prices. The EU 27 is the blue line. The Euro area, the Eurozone, is orange. And the UK at the bottom there in green. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Nigel Nelson.
My point was, within that figure...
I've got more graphs, don't make me use them.
8% of that figure is down to Brexit.
And it's lower than the Eurozone.
About the extra paperwork, but it shouldn't be there in the first place. That means every family is spending £250 more than they need to.
Fair enough. Listen, I've got to say, half my audience will agree with Nigel, and a lot of people are still angry about Brexit, Claire, and you've got to accept that.
They may well be angry about it, but 8 years on, we have Brexit. Now, you can take a view as to whether you think it is successful or not, and it depends why you voted for Brexit in the first place. And because you have a binary choice with a referendum, you have to say yes or no. You don't get to vote on what the government does with it. You have to accept that things aren't going to be perfect and are not going to be smooth. But just to take exception to your food point, do you know the reason why food costs have increased across the world? That is because there have been wars going on. The price of fertiliser is enormous.
But I accept all that.
Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe.
Absolutely, yes. And also your favourite subject of climate change does come into it when you look at flooded fields and all the rest of it. So you can't blame that on Brexit.
No, but within, not the entire 25%, but within that figure is the 8%, which is Brexit.
No, we shouldn't gaslight Nigel. There is a percentage. It's fair to say that some of that cost of food is related to essentially frictions in the flow of goods, right?
And 145 quid per consignment of cheese, fish and meat that they have to pay now, they didn't have to pay before Brexit. That will also put prices up.
Yosef, last word.
What about our society? The last guest mentioned historic principles have been forfeited. They have not. They have been abused. We are a very welcoming country. Our society is being impacted by all the causes of federalism, globalisation, whatever you want to call it. We need localism. We need to get back to what makes our country great and what the people in our country need.
Now, there you go. I tell you what, Joseph David for Prime Minister. Next up, as he turns 80, Thomas Markle doesn't get so much as a text message from his world-famous daughter Meghan. And as he prepares for a TV showdown with Joe Biden, Donald Trump gets a big financial boost and declares that his rambling speeches are a sign of genius. Well, Donald and I have got that in common. We'll discuss both of those issues with our top US correspondent next.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there's a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells, in some spots 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
I'm Camilla Tominey. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
As he turns 80 next month, Thomas Markle gives a moving interview to the Mail newspaper, saying, "I've never been one for birthdays, but I know the one person I most want to hear from, Meghan, will not be in touch. I'd love to meet my grandchildren," he said, "but I'd be happy with a photograph at this stage." Mr Markle became estranged from his youngest daughter, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, in 2018 when he was unable to walk her down the aisle for her marriage to Prince Harry after he suffered 2 heart attacks on the eve of their wedding. The couple have not spoken to him since. Mr Markle has never met his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet. Speaking from his home in Rosarito, Mexico, just 250 miles from the Sussexes' 16-bathroom home in Montecito, California, he remains puzzled that he's never met his son-in-law, asking the paper, "Why didn't Harry ever come to meet me?" Well, for reaction to this sad story, I'm delighted to welcome US political and royal commentator Hilary Fordwich. Hilary, excellent to see you again. Your reaction to this very sad story?
Well, you're absolutely right, Mark. Pleasure to be back with you. It is a frightfully sad story. He also added that he never thought that he'd have something in common with the king. And of course, the king doesn't know his grandchildren either. And I think that's a very sad state of affairs. What is very important, the important thread here, though, is the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of Meghan Markle claiming to care about people and all the tours they go on where they have empathy for people, and yet her very own father. And also, Mark, it really happened so fast. In 2016, she posted on Instagram that her daddy was the greatest in the world. And the other thing is that she claimed that she had made everything herself and she came from a very poor family. Actually, she had a very privileged childhood, being sent to private schools in California. And of course, her father, he was the one who set her off on her career in Hollywood. It wasn't all done by herself.
Most definitely. Now, the Sussexes are all about PR, aren't they? And this is not good for their brand. Thomas Markle, poor old Thomas Markle, as he approaches his 80th birthday, is a serious thorn in the side and, frankly, an ongoing embarrassment to the couple.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that's immensely sad is that, Meghan Markle wasn't happy to be number 2 to Princess Catherine, and now she ends up being really nothing because dog biscuits and jam really don't rank when it comes to being in relation to the royal family. So instead of being number 2, to go from number 2 to nothing, and also of the greatest sadness is that I think that, and I've said this before, but most importantly, that Prince Harry squandered the love and actually the empathy of a nation. And at this time, yes, her father is experiencing the same thing as the king. And last but not least, I do think that a tiger doesn't change its stripes. What we have to look at here is track record. Somebody who's dumped her friends, dumped her own family, dumped her country originally when she came over to the UK, and even her adopted dog. There is a track record there, and Thomas Markle has sadly said it's referred to now as being Markled when you're dumped.
However, there's two sides to every story, especially in families, aren't there, Hilary? And are there not allegations that Thomas Markle might have leaked some of Meghan Markle's private correspondence? And of course, there was that embarrassing scene in an internet cafe in Mexico where it looked like he was posing for photographs prior to their wedding, heaping embarrassment on the couple.
Yes, and actually he was purportedly paid for those paparazzi photographs that you're referring to prior to their wedding. I do think from things that I've heard from other people, though, he was duped. And certainly her sister Samantha says that he was duped into doing that. And also at the time, he didn't realize how hurtful it would be. But again, Mark, what about hypocrisy? If it's so bad to throw your family under the royal bus, then why do it yourselves? That's what Harry's been doing, and that's what Meghan Markle have been doing. So I didn't think they thought that was so bad, actually.
Indeed. Of course, Donald Trump has had a challenging couple of months, but a good week, hasn't he, Hilary Fordwich? First of all, he's received a single donation of $50 million, which is quite remarkable. The money is pouring into the coffers. You've got leading political and business figures who are getting behind his campaign. And, of course, he faces Joe Biden this week in a major TV leaders debate. Do you think things are on the up for Donald Trump?
Well, actually, yes, Mark. The reason that those donations have flooded in are a couple of things. Number one, after his subpoenas and after the verdict, they actually rocketed. I think it's because a lot of Americans were disgusted with the unfair judicial system and the basically rigged judicial system here in the United States. That actually was a lot of donors, but also importantly, he has actually gone into places, Mark, that no Republican has been since Ronald Reagan. Donald Trump has now been into California. He went to a bodega in the Bronx in New York City. He's been into neighborhoods that are predominantly ethnic and Black neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods that have been taken for granted for years by the Democrats. And what he's doing is something, like I said, no one's done it since Reagan. And it's that community. Most of these donations, over 75% of the donations, Mark, are under $50. And they're new donations. That is huge. A vast swath of America that hasn't voted for a Republican is now going to vote for a Republican.
Hilary, always a thrill to have you on the show. We'll catch up soon. My thanks there to US political and royal commentator Hillary Fordwich. Fascinating debate, I tell you. So I'd like to be a fly on the wall for those TV debates. Trump versus Biden this week. But coming up, is university a waste of time and money for millions of young Brits when they could do practical training instead? I'll be asking my Mark Meets guest, former Minister for Skills and Apprenticeships, Robert Halfon. That's next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Today we've got two fantastic individuals who have invented a teddy bear to help children who are suffering with mental health.
Yes, so Lynn and Samantha Crilly came up with the idea for the Trouble Muncher toy following Samantha's own battle with an eating disorder and OCD.
Yes, the teddy comes with a notepad and encourages its owners to write down what's troubling them, and then they can pop the note into the rucksack on the bear's back.
I struggled with mental health most of my life, actually, and oh no, it's fine. I've got one. I feel quite sorry for you. But and one thing I always did was message my mum, and it was a thought disassociation kind of technique. I would message you. Even now, I message you thoughts that come into my mind, but massively when I was younger. And I thought, what happens if you're younger and you don't have this?
Yeah, and I think in today's technology-fueled world, I think we go back to basics, and it just helps them to process by writing it down. Everything's so instant these days.
So it's like an indirect way of telling your parents how you're feeling, what you're going through. Such a great idea. What's the feedback been from parents who have got a Trouble Muncher for their kids? What you've got any stories?
It's been really good. In one household, he sits on the kitchen side, and I think during the day, the parents, the children put their worries in, or at night, and then they know that their parents will look at it during the day. And it's gone into some schools as well.
You'd imagine you'd want one of these Trouble Munchers in every classroom and in every school up and down the country, because children who are being bullied, for example, who feel like they can't tell their parents, they're too embarrassed to talk about it. This is such an important tool, isn't it, for children to communicate that?
Yeah, well, you were saying Mum's a mental health counsellor, and you had a young child who had Snapchat AI. So you talk to an AI in Snapchat, and that's what they talk to now.
The People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Okoye, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Coming up in a Take at 10 special with Wimbledon around the corner, there's one noticeable absentee. The treatment of Sue Barker, unceremoniously dumped by the Beeb, is a national disgrace. That is my Take at 10 in 15 minutes' time. I guarantee you won't want to miss it. You also won't want to miss this. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets, and this evening, former Conservative MP Robert Halfon, who was in the House of Commons from 2010 to 2024. He's now a man of leisure. He served in the Cabinet under David Cameron, was a minister under Theresa May, and was appointed Minister of State for Skills, Apprenticeships and Higher Education by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Robert, lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here. Just to qualify one thing, I'm not quite a man of leisure, because I am out all the time.
You're campaigning?
Campaign for the brilliant, I know we can't mention the name, but the brilliant,
a good local candidate.
Conservative parliamentary candidate who used to work with me in my office. She's from Harlow. And so I'm working with her just to try and make sure she gets elected.
Well, that's good. You see, what we can do, the way the rules work, if we say one name, we've got to say all the names.
That's right.
And then I don't get to talk to you.
I know.
I'd much rather ask you about your life and your career, which has been a stellar one.
Thank you.
First of all, you were Deputy Party Chairman in 2015 when David Cameron was Prime Minister, at the tail end of that era. Have you known the party in a worse state than it currently is?
And when David Cameron was leader, he was very, very political to his fingertips, and he understood the Conservative Party, and central office was a really professional machine. And it won, we don't forget, we won the 2015 election against the odds after all the years of the austerity cuts and so on, which everyone said we were going to lose. I don't think clearly central office is in a good place as it was in those days. And whatever happens at the election, whatever happens, I absolutely believe that they need to start from ground zero and create a new CCHQ from the ground upwards that is much more democratic for its members, but also, offers professional services, because when you join, you just get messages, can I have some more money, asking for donations all the time. You should get membership services. In many ways, the Conservative Party joining the Conservative Party should be like joining a trade union. I don't mean going on strikes, but when you join a trade union, you get membership services, private health insurance, you get discounts on loans, you get fuel cards and things like that. That's what, people join the Conservative Party, that's what they should have to do, and also participate in political activities, of course, which is the most important. So there has to be change. And the gambling thing, of course, with senior people at CCHQ is really depressing. But I'll tell you why it's depressing, because I mentioned the Conservative parliamentary candidate, but she's got a chance of being MP. But the people who are working for her, the volunteers, they're out till midnight. They were out till midnight
Stuffing
last night.
envelopes as well.
Stuffing envelopes, leafleting in very, very hot weather, day in, day out. And when all this sort of thing goes on, it's heartbreaking because they don't get paid. There's thousands and thousands of volunteers trying to elect Conservative MPs in the country, and they feel let down, and that is really sad.
What would you say to previous Conservative voters watching and listening to this programme who feel that the Tory party isn't Conservative anymore and that's why they're looking at reform?
I'd say to them, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Because the reality is that it will let in Labour. If you vote for reform, it will let in Labour, and then we have a Labour supermajority with everything that no reform voter would want to happen. Open doors on immigration, high taxes, raiding our pension funds, spending money on quangos. Now, I must believe actually the government have done some good things. We've got some amongst the highest growth rate in Europe, and actually it's anniversary of Brexit. So we've got high employment. We've created over 5 million apprenticeships in 2010. We've got the best readers of kids in the Western world. Of course things have gone wrong, and of course not everything is the way people would like it to be, but don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and just, for a moment's anger in the polling booth, all you're going to do is let Labour in, and then they'll be able to do what they want. OK, you mentioned open borders. Labour are clear that they're going to reduce immigration. They think it's too high. It's got high under the Tories, and they will stop the boats. But, of course, you're entitled to your view. You're in campaigning mode. You were the political director of the Conservative Friends of Israel. Clearly, October the 7th was a devastating nightmare for that country, the greatest single attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. However, what is your appraisal of Israel's response since? Have they gone too far? I think it's tragic what's gone on. Of course, innocent lives have been lost. But let's remember this was the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And Hamas are no different to the Nazis. They actually say they want to eradicate Jews. I've been to meet the hostages, families, when I was in Parliament. I've seen the films, the awful sexual mutilation of the victims of the massacres of October 7th. Israel has to get rid of Hamas. So if Israel doesn't get rid of Hamas, and Hezbollah, by the way, in the north, all supported by Iran, then all that happens is that you knock a bit of it away and then it comes back, and then they'll do another massacre in 6 months, a year's time, God forbid. So, of course, it's awful to see what's going on. But when Hamas hides in schools, when it hides in hospitals, when it hides in the tunnels that are bigger than the New York Metro, what else are they supposed to do?
And when it doesn't put civilians in those tunnels.
And exactly. But they put the missiles in the schools where the civilians are. And don't forget, what people is often not reported is that every day missiles are being fired onto Israel, both from the north and from
Here's a question
Gaza.
for you, though, in a historic context. Is Hamas a symptom and a byproduct of Israel's actions over decades?
Absolutely not. Israel is a free democracy. You have Arab MPs, you have Arab judges, you have everybody walks around freely.
And
whatever
Gaza
religion
being
they
an
are.
open prison, apartheid?
Gaza, the Israelis left it years and years ago. And don't forget, there was an open border with Egypt. Egypt could open the border with Gaza. You know, the Israelis withdrew from Gaza many, many years ago. Many, many years ago. And so this idea that it's a prison when they've left it and they were allowed to govern themselves, and all that they've done is turn it into a terrorist enclave run by Hamas, funded by Iran.
I've got two more before you go, and of course I look forward to your return. You've been doing lots on GB News, and I hope that continues. You had some health issues when you were a child. I think a mild form of cystic fibrosis?
No. It's cerebral palsy.
Cerebral palsy, forgive me.
I have a version of that.
Completely different disease, cerebral palsy. And I know you have never allowed that to define you, and it hasn't defined you. But how has it impacted your career and your life?
Well, in my younger years, it was, I was always told I wasn't going to be able to walk, and my father, he showed me letters that doctors wrote to him at the time saying I wouldn't be able to do anything and I should go to special school.
So you were written off as a child, really?
But my father didn't write me off. So he took me to this amazing professor in Great Ormond Street Hospital who said absolute nonsense. He could sort me out. So from the age of 7 right up to adult life, I had one operation after the other. I have said this recently, but you won't know this. Nadine Dorris was once a nurse, the former MP, in a hospital I was in.
Is that right?
As a child, yeah. And she remembers it. And so we joke that it was more the pot than the plot from her book. But here I became an MP and a government minister, so it just shows what you can do. I've never felt myself to be disabled, by the way. I felt my legs being a bit messed up, but I've been given many other things that I'm very lucky.
Well, I got so many happies of doing breakfast, Julia Hartley-Brewer, on Talk Radio with you, and now you'll be doing loads on GB News, and look forward to seeing what you do next. But next up, the BBC's treatment of Wimbledon star Sue Barker is a disgrace. That's my take at 10. Next.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there is a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells. In some spots, 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15 and a set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction. You have to hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can also enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians in the media, but actually it's about you.
And we won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear
all sides
as you make your decision ahead of polling day.
We're here for you.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's election channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party. I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said stump. You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. With Wimbledon around the corner, there's one noticeable absentee. The treatment of Sue Barker, unceremoniously dumped by the BBC, is a national disgrace. After an extraordinary intervention from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has Nigel Farage lost the plot over his Ukraine comments, or is he being punished for telling the truth? I'll be asking politics legend Edwina Currie. In the last word, a Labour MP's office is vandalised with the word genocide sprayed on the walls. Meanwhile, a group called the Muslim Vote make a dark threat to Labour by promising a 25-year war, which will, quote, not be pretty for the party, in a since-deleted tweet. Is dangerous sectarian politics here to stay? I'll be asking the government's former anti-Muslim hate czar. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages, a packed show. Lots to get through, folks. But first, the news headlines and Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening. Our top stories tonight. Labour is calling on the Gambling Commission to name candidates being investigated over the election date betting scandal. Pat McFadden, Labour's Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has written to the Commission's CEO, urging for the details to be released before polling day. It comes amid reports that the Conservative Party's Chief Data Officer, Nick Mason, has taken a leave of absence. The Tories' Director of Campaigns, Tony Lee, and his wife, Laura Saunders, are also being probed, as is the PM's Parliamentary Private Secretary, Craig Williams, who's admitted to a, quote, error of judgment. Well, the Labour leader has suggested that benefits offer less dignity to people than earning a living through employment. Sir Keir Starmer took aim at handouts from the state in a piece for the Sunday Telegraph. He said serving the interests of working people means understanding that they want success more than state support. His comments come as the latest Savanta poll shows Labour on 42% of the vote and the Conservatives on just 19%. Flights restarted earlier at Manchester Airport after a quarter were cancelled today due to a power outage. Earlier on, all flights from Terminals 1 and 2 were cancelled, with passengers being advised not to come to the airport after a major power cut caused huge queues and disruption to baggage processing. Work is now underway to reschedule those flights in the coming days, and tomorrow's flights are not thought to be affected. As the search for Jay Slater continues in Tenerife, a fundraiser set up by the last person to see him has now passed its £30,000 target. Search teams attempting to locate the British teenager narrowed their efforts to small buildings close to where his phone last pinged in Tenerife. Jay Slater went missing on Monday after he attended a music festival on the Spanish island. Just before he vanished, the 19-year-old called a friend saying he was lost and needed water. More than 6 police officers, an Orthodox priest and 4 gunmen have been killed in a series of shootings in Dagestan, Russian media reports. The region's interior ministry has been quoted as saying that 12 other police officers have also been injured after the gunmen opened fire at a synagogue, an Orthodox church and a police post in the North Caucasus region. Both the synagogue and the church are said to be ablaze. There have also been reports and eyewitness videos showing people wearing dark clothing, shooting at emergency service vehicles responding in Makhachkala in southern Russia. Well, sadly, Scotland have lost 1-0 to Hungary this evening in their final Group A game of the Euros football tournament. Fans had arrived in jubilant mood earlier at the MHP Arena in Stuttgart. The clash could have seen Scotland reach the knockout stage of a major tournament for the first time. Critics, however, hadn't given the injury-hit Scots much of a hope after their 5-1 opening loss to hosts Germany in Munich. However, a 1-1 draw with the Swiss had placed them within reach of qualification. Tonight's loss will be seen as a devastating blow to the Tartan army. Well, for the latest stories, why not sign up for GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Mark.
Thank you, Ray. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. After an extraordinary intervention from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has Nigel Farage lost the plot over his Ukraine comments? Or is he being punished for simply telling the truth? I'll be asking politics legend Edwina Currie. Also tonight, in The Last Word, a Labour MP's office is vandalised with the word genocide sprayed on the walls. Meanwhile, a group called the Muslim Vote make a dark threat to Labour by promising a 25-year war, which will, quote, not be pretty for the party, in a since-deleted tweet. Is dangerous sectarian politics here to stay? I'll be asking the government's former anti-Muslim hate czar. Also, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits this evening: Yosef David, Claire Pearsall and Nigel Nelson. A packed how those papers are coming. Anne Widdecombe is away this week. I think she's having work done, but Edwina is waiting in the wings. We start with My Take at 10. The brilliant American author Maya Angelou had a wonderful saying: people will forget what you did and what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Which takes me to the appalling treatment by the BBC of sports broadcaster and former tennis champ Sue Barker. National treasure status gets flung around rather casually these days, but Sue Barker really is a Great Britain. As a tennis player, she actually hit number 3 in the world, and she won the French Open in 1976. After retirement, she featured in the gossip columns, particularly when she began a relationship with pop superstar and fellow tennis fan Cliff Richard. But romance with Cliff Richard was to be short-lived when she declared, "New balls, please." Having hung up her tennis racket, she picked up the microphone and became an incredibly successful and popular TV broadcaster. And to my mind, the best presenter in the history of Wimbledon. She was Wimbledon, and Wimbledon was her. But it doesn't stop there, because her time hosting A Question of Sport marks her out as one of the most successful entertainment broadcasters in the history of British television. Do you know how long she presented Question of Sport for? 24 years. a quarter of a century. It was a show in which she had to control some very big and noisy egos, including Ali McCoist, Phil Tufnell and Matt Dawson. And she gave as good as she got. Her return game was the best. So with all of that success, as well as hosting the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games and the Grand National, you'd assume that the BBC had her locked into a golden handcuffs deal for life, similar to the one that I've got with GB News. Not so much. Sue Barker ended her Wimbledon duties in 2022 because she was worried that the BBC would try to slowly phase her out. Imagine that. They were worried that they would diminish her role. Although she's put a brave face on her treatment by the BBC, she's confessed that losing the Wimbledon gig came a couple of years before she was ready to go. But she lived in fear of carrying on, only for BBC bosses to be having meetings behind her back about who would replace her. Can you imagine putting this amazing woman through that turmoil? Does the BBC have a culture of ageism? I'm not sure, but ask the brilliant Vanessa Feltz, good friend of mine, who said that you basically become invisible at the Beeb once you turn 60. Why don't you ask dumped Country File star Miriam O'Reilly, who successfully sued the corporation for age discrimination? Why don't you ask Arlene Phillips, who was sacked from Strictly at the tender age of 66, which is 166 in BBC years? Why don't you ask Ken Bruce, the host of the biggest radio show in Europe, on half the salary of his younger colleague Zoe Ball, who had a smaller audience? Ken Bruce left Radio 2 last year to join a commercial rival. Make it make sense. I suppose dusty old Ken Bruce didn't tick any boxes, did he? Just like radio legend Steve Wright, who friends say died of a broken heart after his smash hit Radio 2 show in the afternoon was also cancelled. And as for Question of Sport, after 24 years on air and regularly achieving 4 to 5 million viewers a week, with an entertaining show that all the family could watch, you guessed it, Sue Barker was axed. In her autobiography, Calling the Shots, Barker said that she and her team captains had felt devastated after being called into separate meetings by BBC management in the summer of 2020 and then discovered that they were being fired. Separate meetings. The BBC upset her further with their handling of the announcement. They wanted her, Dawson and Tufnell to sign a statement saying that they had all voluntarily decided to step away. She says in the book it was insulting. Did they actually expect me to sack myself and show myself no respect at all? Sue was replaced by fashionable younger comedian Paddy McGuinness and 2 team captains in Sam Quek and Ugo Monnier, who I've got to confess I've never heard of. Well, the show lost 75% of its audience and was ultimately scrapped. Well done, everyone. Hilariously, the BBC blamed the economic environment and inflation. I'd like to run that through BBC Verify, if you don't mind. As we prepare for another Wimbledon, the BBC's coverage certainly hasn't got the gravitas in the absence of Sue Barker. On my watch, she would still have top billing. She would be the main anchor. I know about this stuff. I'm a big anchor myself. The BBC's treatment of Sue Barker speaks volumes about our national state broadcaster and its attitude to older talent and potentially to the older viewers who watch, who, amid the BBC's push for youth and diversity, wouldn't mind a bit of representation too. Sue Barker gave the BBC a great service game, but their backhanded treatment of this tennis ace is a scandal in straight sets. And with its eye-wateringly high licence fee, that's right, licence fee now, OK, £159 a year, the BBC is starting to look like an expensive racket in its own right. £159, wow. Your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. Let's get a response now from my top pundits. We have former government advisor Claire Pearsall. We have GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson. And former Brexit Party candidate and social worker Yosef David. Let me start with you, Claire. Do you think that I'm being a little harsh on the BBC? After all, it's their job to make sure fresh talent comes through.
I don't think there's anything wrong with fresh talent coming through, but when you look at what Sue Barker achieved and how good she was at Wimbledon, she was the voice of Wimbledon. And when you've got all of that experience, why let somebody walk away? It is absolutely ridiculous. When you saw her on the side of centre court interviewing the players, she got so much more out of them because she had that almost motherly style, but would come in with some real killer questions that you didn't see coming. It was all done so nicely. She was absolutely superb, and I think it's a real shame. I loved listening to her. I learned so much about tennis. I'm not great at tennis myself, and I learned a lot about the game. I learned a lot about the individuals involved in it, and it just made it so much more worthwhile to have her there, and I think it's a real shame. Yes, bring up the younger talent, but don't lose the experience you've got.
Yes, my concern, Yosef, is why the BBC are letting go of talent that are clearly delivering. Question of Sport, 5 million viewers a week, goes down to 1 million viewers and gets scrapped. Ken Bruce, biggest radio show in Europe, not just the UK, goes to a commercial rival. There's a trend here, isn't there?
There's an unfortunate obsession with chasing youthful viewership. And what the BBC have done is they've hamstrung themselves by getting rid of a genuine talent, someone who really knew about tennis, had a genuine love for the game. What we saw last year was, quite frankly, amateurs trying to fill her shoes, and it was impossible. What really grates us, I think, as the British public, is that we want to live in a society where if you're doing the job well, why should you be scrapped? And I think that there isn't really logic in this. It seems to be almost political.
Yes, now, to be fair to the BBC, Nigel, she was axed from Question of Sport, which is mind-blowing. She was offered a new contract for Wimbledon, I think 3 years. But she said that she knew the moment she started that contract, there would be meetings going on behind her back about who's replacing. She genuinely thought that her role would be diminished.
Yes, and had she taken the contract, she would be broadcasting this year at Wimbledon, and
with Claire Balding hovering in the background.
Yeah, and I think I agree with Claire that she was the voice of Wimbledon. She should have been doing it. We all know about television that there's always someone younger, prettier, and wittier around the corner, which is why everyone who works in it feels that so insecure. But experience counts for an awful lot. Her age certainly didn't matter. She was the right person to be doing that job.
Definitely. I mean, let me have a think about this. Diana Moran is a regular pundit on Mark Dolan tonight. She's the Green Goddess, of course, from BBC and all the rest of it. She's 85. I think she gets better with age. I'm tempted to commit on this programme to employ Diana Moran for as long as she wants. She's got a gig for life on this programme.
Good.
And I think, you know, that we just do. I think in our society, Nigel, we need to celebrate older people. And look, I obviously believe in diversity and I believe in bringing in fresh talent. Otherwise, we all wouldn't have careers. But I've got older viewers and listeners watching and listening to this programme in their 70s, in their 80s, maybe in their 90s. And they'd quite like to see some old people on telly as well to represent them.
Well, I'm all in favour of that as being an older worker myself. So.
Well, I know you're 58 now.
Absolutely, yes, indeed.
But that's important. That do you feel like Britain can be a bit ageist sometimes?
Yes, it's very definitely ageist. And the serious point is that they're trying to put pensions up, pension age up, yet companies are getting rid of people at 60. What is going to happen at that gap in the middle?
Yeah, most definitely. Well, let me tell you that when Sue Barker stood down from her role as the face of Wimbledon, the BBC said they would dearly have loved for her to continue. But you know the context to that, so let me know your thoughts, your reaction. gbnews.com/your say. Now, next up, looking forward to this, after an extraordinary intervention from former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has Nigel Farage lost the plot over his Ukraine comments? Or is he being punished for simply telling the truth? I'll be asking politics legend Edwina Currie next.
I'm Camilla Tominey. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Isabel Webster. Thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Today, we've got a veteran who endeavours to help those suffering from anxiety in all its various forms and manifestations.
Yes, over 3 decades, Simon Lee has established himself as a pioneer, seeking new ways to coach personal development and mental strength.
Now, look, there's this famous phrase, isn't it, that hard times create weak men and weak men create hard times. Is that the kind of philosophy that your work is based on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because as a child, I received a masterclass in how weak men create hard times.
Did you go through hard times as a kid?
We had 3 toxic men in the family, and they caused the family no end of grief, trauma and hardship. So, and at the time when you're going through it, you think, well, you can't help but fall into a victim mentality. You think, why me? Why am I going through this? But actually, I couldn't do what I do now without that masterclass.
Do you mind me asking who those men were?
Yep, it's fine. One of them was my stepfather.
Yeah.
One of them was my grandfather, and one of them was my uncle.
Right.
So they're all inner family members. And without exception, all of them, outside of the family doors, wanted to put themselves across as moral pillars of society.
How do you turn that story around and be the man that you are today and turn what you went through into a positive? How do you do that?
You've established that pretty much you can, choose to be a victim of your circumstance or use it as inspiration to do better and say, you know what, when I'm older, for example, if you had a bad childhood, I want to make sure my kids get the kind of childhood I didn't have. So how do you relay that to the people you mentor now, I guess?
What we do, I set up something called Unlimited Courage. We talk about giving men a primary aim of courage. So we bring in philosophies such as Stoicism, our own 7 Courages, Bushido, and they love it. They love it. And I must admit, when I found it, I felt like I'd found the Holy Grail.
Wow.
The People's Channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, in a growing row surrounding the comments of Nigel Farage and Russia's motivation for invading Ukraine, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has hit back. He posted this on Twitter this evening. The former Prime Minister raged, "This is nauseating ahistorical drivel and more Kremlin propaganda. Nobody provoked Putin," says Boris Johnson. "Nobody poked the bear with a stick. The people of Ukraine voted overwhelmingly in 1991 to be a sovereign and independent country. They were perfectly entitled to seek both NATO and EU membership. There's only one person responsible," says Boris Johnson, "for Russian aggression against Ukraine, both in 2014 and 2022, and that is Vladimir Putin." The former Prime Minister goes on to say to try to spread the blame is morally repugnant and parroting Putin's lies. It's bizarre that the author should also suggest we now reduce our support for Ukraine when the solution to the conflict is in fact clear. The Ukrainians need to win and to repel Putin's invasion. They can and they will. The problem in the last 30 years has not been Western provocation, but Western weakness in the face of Russian aggression, a weakness exemplified by this article. Of course, Boris Johnson there referring to Nigel Farage's remarks. Now, Nigel has said that potentially Russia was motivated to invade Ukraine because of an ever-expanding NATO and EU. Well, let's get the views of former government minister and broadcaster Edwina Currie. Edwina, your reaction, first of all, to what Nigel Farage had to say. Is he being punished for telling the truth? Are we killing the messenger here?
No, my reaction was total dismay. I have a Ukrainian family staying with me. They've been here for over 2 years. They are currently actually in Ukraine because their dad's been called up. There is a terrible war going on there, and it's an existential war, and it was caused by Putin doing a land grab. And that's something in this country we should understand really, really well. I mean, it's only a couple of weeks since D-Day. We understand what a land grab is when it's done by a crazy dictator, a mad, power-driven megalomaniac. And we know that sooner or later, the wise countries of the world, the free countries of the world, have got to oppose that and destroy them. We have no choice about this. Otherwise, we are threatened as well. Our closest allies and many countries that are in NATO and have been for many years, like Poland, they understand this. They're very much on the front line and they're very much supporting Ukraine. And I think that having Boris Johnson jump into this is about time. And I'm delighted that he has. He's expressed it extremely well. He was great on Ukraine when he was Prime Minister, and he's great on Ukraine now. And he's absolutely right. Nigel Farage, however articulate he is, and however punchy the things he says, he's totally wrong. He's just become a spokesman for Putin, which is really not desirable in somebody who wants to be a leader in the Free West.
Now, Edwina, I would suggest that's an unfounded allegation that you've made there against Nigel Farage. Writing in yesterday's Telegraph, he points out that he's had this position for many years. He's predicted this invasion. He said, all of this doesn't change the fact that I saw this coming a decade ago. I warned that it was coming, and I'm one of the few political figures who's been consistently right and honest about Russia's Ukraine war. What I've been saying for the last 10 years is that the West has played into Putin's hands, giving him the excuse to do what he wanted to do anyway. Nigel Farage has been very clear in his condemnation of Vladimir Putin and the invasion.
No, he hasn't been very clear. He's making excuses for it, and he's blaming the West. He is very much playing into Putin's hands. He's playing Putin's game. And the fact that he's been doing it for a very long time doesn't actually make things better. It makes things worse. Now, apart from anything else, let's remember that if Farage has indeed been talking about this for 10 years, it was 8 years ago that Putin did his first invasion, when the family that I'm hosting first had to flee with a 5-year-old and a baby in arms. That's the experience of the Ukrainians when they lived in the Donbass or in the Luhansk region, way over in the east. You can imagine what it would be like, Mark, if Newcastle on Tyne or Doncaster, or all the area in the northeast of the country were invaded. And then there was somebody in this country saying, oh, it's all our fault. It's all our fault.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone...
Rubbish.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be unwise to enter Newcastle unarmed, I've got to say. Let me offer you a further quote from Nigel Farage, given that you've been very, very critical, Edwina. Of course, you're entitled to your view. But here's a quote. Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was immoral, outrageous and indefensible. I'm no apologist or supporter of Putin. And he goes on to say, back in 2014, when the EU first offered Ukraine an accession agreement, Farage said in a speech in the European Parliament that there will be a war in Ukraine. Why? Because the expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving Putin a pretext that he would not ignore. So Farage's argument is that what the West have done is offered Vladimir Putin that opportunity, that political opportunity, to take this aggressive action.
No, it's the other way around. NATO is a defensive operation. It always has been a defensive operation. And what Nigel Farage or any of Putin's friends should have been saying to him was, listen, all you have to do is be friends with the West. You know, you've tried that. You've tried that in the past, in 2005 and thereabouts, and it seemed to go extremely well. And we all had very good relations with the Russians, and we were very pleased to have them buying posh flats in London and sending their kids to posh schools. We had good relationships with them, and we were pleased to see that they seemed to be becoming a much more modern country. What went wrong? Goodness only knows. Putin has always had the same kind of mindset. I mean, he was the head of the KGB in East Germany, and I suspect what he's really aggrieved about is that East Germany reunified, what is it, over 30 years ago, and he really wants his bit of countryside back. I mean, he's nuts. He's nuts. And no leader should ever make any attempt to defend what he's doing. No leader in the West. And Farage is right when he says it's indefensible, so don't defend it. Don't defend it. You should be defending your own country and our own values, especially if you're really talking about becoming Conservative, becoming an MP and leading the Conservative Party in future.
Freudian slip there. There you go. Listen, Edwina, what a treat to have you with us on a Sunday night. Really enjoyed our conversation. We'll catch up soon. My thanks to former Conservative Government Minister Edwina Currie, who has no truck with Nigel Farage's comments about Ukraine. What do you think? gbnews.com/your say. I've been very bad on messages so far tonight. We'll get to them at 10:30. But next up, tomorrow's front pages. And let me tell you, full pundit reaction. And is dangerous sectarian politics here to stay? An MP's office vandalised, and a terrifying message on Twitter about a 25-year war against Labour. Find out more after this.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there's a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells. In some spots, 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
This is GB News, and we are Britain's election channel.
This vote may seem to be about the politicians and the media, but it's actually about you. We won't forget that.
Join us up and down the country as we follow every moment together.
More than ever, it's important to hear all sides
as you make your decision in the run-up to polling day.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel. Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's exactly 10:30. Bit of housekeeping for you. First of all, this is our last show from the Westminster studio. We'll be back in our fancy central London location as of next weekend. And Martin Daubney is away on Tuesday from 3 till 6 p.m. and I'll be looking after the show. So do join me on Tuesday from 3 till 6 p.m. in the afternoon when I'll be doing some grown-up telly. Makes a change. OK, folks, time for this. Daily Mail, 10 days left to stop disaster of a Starmer supermajority. Newspaper, Tories question Sunak's leadership as he resists calls to suspend betting scandal suspects. Daily Telegraph, Labour to rip up school trans ban. Labour could ditch guidelines banning children from being taught that there are more than two genders, a shadow minister has suggested. Bridget Phillipson said that guidance announced by the Conservatives earlier this year on what pupils can be taught about sex and gender would be reviewed by a Labour government. Also, election date betting inquiry widened and three-day waits in A&E for more than 19,000 patients. Also, power cut chaos at Manchester Airport. It was a disaster in Manchester today. All the flights were cancelled, devastating for people trying to either go on a business trip or, more importantly, go on holiday. The Guardian now, Sunak urged to drop candidates as betting investigation widens. Labour set to name dozens of new peers, and really sad news regarding the football. Scotland out of the Euros after last-ditch defeat. The Times, Farage wants the West to start sensible negotiations with Vladimir Putin. Western leaders should hold peace talks with President Putin to break the stalemate in Ukraine, Nigel Farage has said. The Reform UK leader has already courted criticism from across the political spectrum after claiming that the West provoked Russia into war by expanding the European Union and NATO further east. A Labour plan for changing gender with less evidence. Labour will make it easier for people to legally transition by removing the need for them to prove they've lived as their preferred gender for 2 years. Under the present rules, transgender people wishing to have their new gender legally recognised must obtain a gender recognition certificate. So there you are. Look, that's an interesting story. Murray is in a hurry to recover for Wimbledon. No Sue Barker, but Andy Murray has desperately hoped that he could make a final appearance at Wimbledon, the stage on which he produced some of his most extraordinary tennis before his retirement. But the former world number one is now fighting to get fit enough to start the tournament next Monday after undergoing surgery on his back. Metro, Met Office issues risk of death warning. Turning up the heat, Britain could see its first 30-degree centigrade heat wave of the summer this week, prompting a health warning over an increased risk of death for vulnerable people. Those are your front pages. For full reaction, I'm delighted to welcome former government advisor Claire Pearsall, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson, and former Brexit Party candidate and social worker Yosef David. I'm very interested by this story, Nigel Nelson. 10 days left to stop the disaster of a Starmer supermajority. The male right voters have just 10 days to save Britain from the calamity of a Labour supermajority. The Prime Minister will warn tomorrow. In a dramatic message, Rishi Sunak will urge disaffected Tory supporters not to hand unchecked power to Sir Keir Starmer when they cast their vote on July the 4th. Now, the first thing, my interpretation of that, Nigel, is that they seem to have conceded defeat already.
Absolutely, and this is the last throw of the dice. What they're trying to do is to get people in especially marginal constituencies to vote for them, or at least not vote for Labour, in the hope that they can reduce this so-called supermajority. Problem with that, and our first past the post system doesn't work. You can do it in individual seats, but you can't have any kind of, well, a third of us won't vote for Labour, therefore we'll keep their majority down. You can get rid of your Tory candidate or your Liberal Democrat candidate by voting tactically, but you really can't do anything about the outcome of for the country. And bear in mind that although we all have the right to vote, not every vote carries the same weight. So if you're in a very marginal constituency, your vote is more important, and 200,000 votes can actually change the course of an election.
Yeah, Claire Pearsall, Labour look likely to win the next election. No surprises there. That's not a plot spoiler, is it? But is the idea of a supermajority for any party a bad thing? Is it dangerous for democracy?
It's never great to hand one party an enormous amount of power, but I do dislike this word supermajority. I really wish that people would stop using it. It's an Americanism. It means something in American politics. It doesn't in the United Kingdom. We had an 80-seat majority. Do you remember those days when the Conservative Party were in power? That could be a supermajority in first past the post. So it's a ridiculous statement. But on the serious side of this, I think it is really bad politics, really bad for democracy to have one party that can largely go unchecked by anybody in opposition if if, for example, they have something like a 200 to 300 seat advantage.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's possible that Labour could win 500 seats, which would be quite remarkable, but biggest win in 100 years of parliamentary democracy, Joseph. Is that proof that somehow our electoral system is flawed in some way?
I personally am an advocate for proportional representation, but I have to say we live in a democracy, and if people want to vote in a Labour super majority, for lack of a better term, then more power to them.
Should we come up with another name? Should we call it a mega majority?
Just a majority.
OMG? WTF?
Why wait?
Family show, behavioural.
Why wait for the last 10 days when you've had 15 years? This is the thing. This is the politics of fear. It's saying don't vote for those guys. They're going to be far worse than us.
As somebody that wants a Conservative victory, are you disappointed by this approach from the Prime Minister?
I'm disappointed with the entire campaign, if I'm honest.
Why is that?
It's lacklustre. It hasn't managed to connect with the electorate, and it hasn't taken into account that people are genuinely very upset with the Conservatives. I think if we'd come out and said, hands up, we have messed this up. This is what we offer. This is why you should vote Conservative as opposed to don't vote for Labour. I think things might be quite different.
Would you have waited till November?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Nigel, if Sir Keir Starmer achieves an enormous majority, a wowzer majority, 500 seats, majority of several hundred, would that change how Labour do government?
Yes, because they don't have any opposition. And I think that it's absolutely right. What you do need is some kind of decent opposition to scrutinise you. I mean, you're not voting stuff down. So let's give Labour 100, 150 majority. That's fine. When you start getting into the several hundred, I mean, we could be talking about a 300 majority. They could almost do whatever they like. And suddenly, the House of Lords is the place that becomes important because they're the ones who can call them to account. And Keir Starmer, of course, has a long-term plan to abolish the House of Lords.
Yes, and this is would be an historic opportunity to have major constitutional change like that with such a large majority.
Yeah, I don't think he would do it on that basis because you really would need to keep some kind of check and balance on a government. What will probably happen, if you end up this way, it'll all sort itself out in the sense the opposition will be within the Labour Party. It'll form itself into factions.
Yeah.
And that's where the pressure will come on Keir Starmer.
But with a majority of, let's say, 300, it's impossible for there to be a Labour equivalent of the ERG. Or the Northern Research Group or any...
No, they could. I mean, yes, you could find that. The same sort of factionalisation you've seen in the Conservative Party, you would find in the Labour Party. They've had different groups, the Tribune Group, for instance, which is quite left-wing. So various groups may well form, but it would obviously be within the party.
But would they only have leverage if he had a sort of 20 or 30-seat majority? If it's 300, don't the mathematics always favour the Prime Minister?
Of course it does, which is the problem with whatever we call this thing, a wowzer majority, a super majority, you name it. Yes, that is a problem. What I'm arguing is that it's probably the Labour Party that would curtail certain plans if that was the result. Politics always sort of finds its own level at some point.
Do you think that Starmer, if he does have this amazing majority, will go beyond the remit of the manifesto? What might a Labour government do with unchecked power?
I think there is the taxation question. And the problem is at the moment is everybody is looking at the Conservative Party and what they're not doing. What we should be looking at are what the other parties are purporting to offer. We're not scrutinising Labour's offering at the moment. We're not looking at the potential rise in taxation, which could come, the concreting over Greenbelt, which could come, potential for...
Grey belt, rather than Greenbelt.
No, Greenbelt. There has been an article recently that said Greenbelt.
Yeah, but some of this Greenbelt...
Considering that you live in an area with Greenbelts, I thought you'd be a bit more concerned that the countryside is going to be concreted.
But what I'm saying is that some Greenbelt could be a car park, it could be some Greenbelt was actually designated as a landfill site.
It's not all summer meadows, is it?
It's not all summer meadows, but I think it's quite concerning. The Labour Party are also looking to change and reform the planning sector so that you wouldn't have community voices being able to overrule these planning permissions either.
But that's to achieve their plans of wind farms and solar.
So you'd be quite happy for a 500-house development to be put on your doorstep with absolutely no notice taken of infrastructure, of utilities.
I prefer a wind farm.
You would prefer
But
somewhere else.
to be fair to Labour, if it's in their manifesto to build 1.5 million new homes, which is the plan, they've got to build them somewhere.
Indeed. However, I would say Labour still believe that we have a housing crisis as opposed to a population crisis. And to give them unchecked power when already our town centres are being destroyed by these Lego buildings that are coming up everywhere, I think that the entire country will look very different at the end of a Labour government.
Of course, Labour will argue that they will use any majority to make Britain better, fix our broken economy and tackle illegal immigration. And if they win, let's hope they do. What about this, though, in the Times, Yosef? Labour plan for changing gender with less evidence. And also Telegraph, Labour to rip up school trans ban. It's an interesting story. Labour could ditch guidelines banning children from being taught there are more than 2 genders, according to the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. Your reaction to that?
So this comes up quite a lot in my work. I deal with clients who are trans, who are going through these changes. What I would say is it's very dangerous to take a political stance on this. You need to follow the science, what the medical professions are saying. And if we look at what happened with the Tavistock Clinic and how they've had their knuckles wrapped so superbly.
And, of course, they were shut down.
Indeed. I think we need to be very, very careful with this. There's no denying that people who are going through these kind of changes or body dysmorphia are going through something incredibly significant and they need kindness and compassion. But we need to be very careful about these. These are long-standing changes to somebody's physiology.
Nigel, does this paint a picture of 5 years of woke hell under Labour?
No, what you're just doing is making, if you decide to change your gender, it is to do it in a less humiliating way. So at the moment, what Labour are planning to suggesting is rather than the 2 years beforehand living in your acquired gender before you apply for a gender recognition certificate, this is saying that they would have a cooling off period after that to reverse their decision. That seems a minor change and perfectly reasonable. The big one is the fact that people won't have to go before a gender recognition panel, which they find really humiliating to have to open everything up to a group of strangers, psychologists, lawyers, doctors. So that would be abandoned. So all you're doing is you're making it a bit more dignified if you want to change gender.
Although what I think it sounds like to me, Claire, and I hear what you're saying, Nigel, but it sounds to me like Labour is yielding to trans ideology, which is the idea that you can change your biological sex, which last time I checked from my GCSE biology textbook is not possible.
I think they are, and I think this was inevitable, but it's a really tricky subject, and I really wish that it was not being put as a political football. I really do. There are vulnerable people out there, and we are talking about people's lives. Now, I have my own views on it, but I also think that we need to be mindful of the feelings and give respect to those individuals going through
And we've got to, if you want to live as a trans person, you know, you've got to have love and support and respect and all that. But a really quick one, you're a mother, aren't you?
Yeah.
How do you feel about kids aged 8 or 9 being told there are more than, 100 genders?
Not at that age, and I don't think that you should have that. I think, yes, talk to them. Sex and relationship education only at that
I'm not sure I would even say that there are 100 genders to Nigel Nelson, because I think it would confuse him.
I would be confused.
Yes, very... Nigel, yes, he's spent decades on Fleet Street.
But we must educate our kids. That's the important thing.
Educate, fair enough. Brilliant stuff. Well, look, next up, more of tomorrow's front pages. We've got the Daily Mirror in the wings, and also in the last word, a Labour MP's office is vandalised with the word genocide sprayed on the walls. Meanwhile, a group called the Muslim Vote make a dark threat to Labour by promising a 25-year war, which will not be pretty for the party, in a since-deleted tweet. Is dangerous sectarian politics here to stay? I'll be asking the government's former anti-Muslim hate czar next.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The woke be with you these days, not the force be with you. And Star Wars, it was the one thing as a kid that brought me and my brother together pretty close, and I love it with all my heart. But ever since Disney took it over, this diversity, equity and inclusion has run rampant throughout it. And actually we've had the actress from the latest Star Wars spin-off, a series on Disney, actually saying that making white people cry was actually what she wanted to do. Have a listen.
When people watch The Hate U Give, what do you want them to walk away with? Because I know everyone has a slightly different feeling.
Well, I mean, white people crying actually was the goal.
Yeah, so that diversity, equity and inclusion running rampant throughout Hollywood and ruining really good franchises. Actually ensuring, apparently, R2-D2, the little robot, you know, that scoots about and gets on the starships and all the rest of it, apparently that could be a lesbian now.
She's half white, this actress. This is what I don't understand. She's half Danish, then half African-American.
I have skin in this game, as you know, with a mixed-race child. Nobody ever sees a mixed-race child as half white. They see them as black.
We used to say that to focus on the colour of someone's skin was rampant racism and therefore we ought to reject it. Now we're saying actually potentially the only thing that we should notice about a person is the colour of their skin.
I don't really think she was actually wanting white people to be sobbing, and it wasn't malicious, but it's just this silly kind of ruination of something that's meant to be entertainment and fun. I wouldn't go as far as to say Star Wars is art. I'm not.
I love Star.
It is, you know, excluding people. Yeah. It's actually dividing people. Once again, by the colour of their skin, we are teaching people to not like each other.
The People's Channel.
On election night, we are throwing a party.
The GB News Election Night Watch Party will be live from Essex and you are all invited.
On air from 10 o'clock, we'll have familiar faces from across the channel, entertainment and lots more stuff as we keep our eye on all the results as they come flying in.
If you want to join our live Election Night Watch Party audience, scan the QR code on screen or go to gbnews.com/election party.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Bit of election housekeeping. Earlier we spoke to former Conservative MP Robert Halfon, who said he's been campaigning in Harlow. So here's a list of the candidates who are running. We've got Hannah Ellis, Conservatives, Malcolm Featherstone, Reform UK, Yasmin Gregory, Greens, Riyad Manan, Liberal Democrats, Lois Perry, UKIP, and Chris Vince, Labour. And it's time now for the last word, and Stella Creasy, a Labour parliamentary candidate, has had the windows of her office smashed and the words Labour child bombing liars graffitied on the pavement outside. Meanwhile, in a since-deleted tweet, but we've got it here for you if you're watching the programme. If you're listening on the radio, I'll read it out. This is a group called the Muslim Vote, who make a dark threat to Labour, promising a 25-year war, which, and I quote, will not be pretty for the party. What does that mean? And is this kind of dangerous sectarian politics here to stay? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome the government's former anti-Muslim hatred czar, Fiaz Mughal. Fiaz, good to see you again. First of all, how would you interpret that threatening message from a group calling themselves the Muslim Vote?
Well, I would interpret it as intimidating, harassing, and potentially threatening to future Labour candidates. You know, to have something, an entity called the Muslim Vote by itself is deeply problematic, as if religion should get involved in how people vote. I have a real substantive problem with that. So that tweet was appalling. It shows the mindset of the people behind this website. It is highly divisive. And in this election where people are being intimidated, Stella Creasy, for example, we need to clearly say it is unacceptable. And that particular website, we need to find out who's behind it and who's funding it, because we don't need such sectarianism and division in our country right now.
Indeed, but will these voices get louder as the years go by? I mean, let's not forget that Sir Keir Starmer convinced the Speaker of the House not to run an amendment vote on a ceasefire in Gaza because he feared for the safety of his MPs. This is a genuine threat to our democracy, isn't it?
It is. It is. Look, this is a genuine threat to our democracy. Russia are a genuine threat to our democracy. China. There are numerous factors that are impacting on our fragile democracy. I need to be very clear. Democracy is fragile. We have had this fragility of a sense where we can all partake in who gets elected in our democratic systems. But the fact is we must defend our fragile democracy. This is a threat. Extremism is a threat. Sectarianism is a threat. And we just can't accept these kind of statements, these kind of websites. And I would say even the people who are funding them need to be found out, because this is dividing and creating fear and instability in our country, and we don't need this.
Most definitely, Fiaz. What would you say, how would you put it percentage-wise, the extent to which these small groups like the Muslim vote represent the views of British Muslims? I mean, how fringe are they, do you think?
Look, I don't think they're that fringe, okay? I don't think they're that fringe, sadly. You know, you're asking me percentage-wise, I would say something under the 10%, okay? Still, that is still a significant amount of individuals. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that we have an ongoing problem? We do have an issue of a battle of values in this country, something I've always said. We have an issue of a battle of values. We have to have a substantive definition of the values of our country that bind us. The last sets of governments didn't do that. I strongly suspect Labour will not do that, but I hope that they do, that they actually try to find the values that bind us and support them. So, you know, these kind of groups are playing on fractures in society. And frankly, we have a lot of work to do to explain, to be able to educate, inform, and bring us together on core values of our country.
Fiaz, good to see you again. We'll catch up soon. My thanks to the government's former anti-Muslim hate czar, Fiaz Mughal. Fascinating conversation. Let's get a reaction from my top pundits, including Yosef David. Your reaction to those scenes? You've got a Labour MP's constituency office vandalised and a threatening message from the Muslim vote.
So this is a deeply undemocratic. It stands against everything that we stand for in this country. And I think what's very clear is that these actors have been emboldened by a lacklustre police service and, quite frankly, a justice system that is a joke. If people are committing these kinds of crimes, getting a slap on the wrist and being allowed to rejoin society as if nothing ever happened, it's tacit encouragement for this behaviour.
I cannot disagree. Cannot agree with you more. Can I thank Yosef David, Claire Pearsall and Nigel Nelson? We could have easily done another hour, but Headlines is on the way. Headliners is coming. Thank you to my team for working so hard this weekend. I'm back on Tuesday from 3 to 6 p.m. in for Martin Daubney. Do join me on Tuesday afternoon. And, of course, Friday for Friday Night Live and next weekend. Headliners is next. Keep it GB News.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A warmer night tonight compared with much of summer so far, and then a mostly fine start to the new week with a ridge of high pressure extending across the UK. Now there's a weak front approaching the far northwest. That's thickening up the cloud, freshening up the breeze across western Scotland, Northern Ireland overnight, with some patchy cloud arriving and also some patchy outbreaks of light rain and drizzle. Clear spells generally elsewhere, with temperatures holding up under those clear spells, in some spots 15 or 16 Celsius by dawn. There will be some mist and low cloud across the far southwest, and there'll be a lot of low cloud in the north and northwest of Scotland, with those outbreaks of rain affecting the west coast and the Western Isles. Elsewhere across Scotland, plenty of early sunshine to come, 15 or 16 Celsius first thing. Northern Ireland, some sun breaking through the early cloud and any light showers tending to fizzle away. Much of England and Wales, sunny first thing. There will be some mist around southern coasts and some low cloud inland as well. That should tend to lift and break up. Plenty of sunshine then developing across the UK, and even across western Scotland the cloud will thin and the rain will ease. So a fine summer's day for the vast majority, and it's going to feel hotter compared with the weekend. Temperatures reaching 26 to 28 Celsius in the southeast, up to 25 Celsius for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, mid to high teens around coasts and the far north. Now into Tuesday, another weak front pushes thicker cloud once again into western Scotland and Northern Ireland. As that moves across Scotland, the chance of some heavy showers in the northeast. Elsewhere, the heat continues to build. Temperatures rise day by day, up to 30 Celsius in places by Wednesday and Thursday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win big this summer. First, there's a fabulous £15,000 in tax-free cash to ensure this summer is special. What would you spend that on? Next, you'll also receive the latest iPhone 15